Hello again, it's your old friend Theta, the Monotone Messiah. Today we have yet another Q&A, the sixth one to be exact. Before I get started, I want to say congratulations to Alex VR, who won my Twitter contest for a JB Signature Series stock made by the one and only James Boak. And in addition to the stock, I gave out a surprise second prize t-shirt to the next person who came up in my name picking system, and that person turned out to be Soju. Congratulations to both of you. I hope you enjoy your new gear. On a personal note, Mayhem, as of this Sunday night, is now a master level team. By the time you watch this, that may have changed, I have no idea, but for now, I just want to say how proud I am of my teammates and all the work they've put in. It's also important for me to remind anyone watching this video that I only answer questions that get posted in the Q&A channel on my Discord, which is called The Cult of Theta. If you have a question you'd like answered, simply go to invite.gg/ThetaVR to join the Discord, then head over to the Q&A channel. Alright, let's roll some footage and start answering your questions. Scrib135 asks, when reviewing match footage, is there anything specific you should be looking for? Mostly I'm looking for two things. Number one are patterns, and number two are errors. I did a whole video on pattern recognition, which is called, believe it or not, pattern recognition. So I won't go too deep into that, but mostly what I'm looking for are behaviors that are predictable in some way. And there's a whole bunch of layers to that, which I go into in the pattern recognition video. Just a quick overview, though, is I'm looking for habits and things that are, for lack of a better term, exploitable. If I know that you're going to do the same things over and over again in specific situations, then that means I can shape my strategy around those tendencies. And when I'm watching my own play, I'm thinking about that too. I'm thinking, okay, am I being too predictable? And would somebody watching this footage know exactly how to piece me up if I face them in a match? That's what I'm looking for. And the other side of that, as I mentioned, is errors. And errors can be defined in many ways, but for me, it's, okay, this person did this thing that they shouldn't have done in this particular situation. And that's connected to pattern recognition too, because if somebody makes an error repeatedly, say they only make it once in one game, but you see it occurring in multiple games in similar situations, then you can say, oh, okay, that person makes this mistake in this situation, which is a pattern in and of itself. The other element of this particular piece is I'm looking for mistakes that I'm making, and maybe it's not even a pattern. Maybe it's just this in this particular situation, which I had not seen before, I had not thought about. I did the objectively incorrect thing. I will say that Mayhem does something that I recommend every team does, which is at some point after a match that's been casted, sit down and review your footage with the team so everybody can give their input. When we're watching footage, all of us will at one point or another say, well, that was stupid of me. I shouldn't do that in the future. We just had a match last night, and off the top of my head, I can think of several situations where I could have said that, and I did say that in our match review after the game. It's good to have that kind of culture. What you don't want to do is watch a game and blame bugs or do other stupid stuff that doesn't involve real critical thinking. So above all, if you just go beyond the patterns and errors I'm talking about, what you want to be doing is just having the most critical, objective as possible examination of what's going on in the game. And something else that I've talked about a little bit is non-judgmental awareness. And that's something you should really be trying to embrace. Non-judgmental awareness just means you don't make quality judgments about yourself. You don't say, oh, I'm stupid, or I'm an idiot and that's why I did these things. You just say, well, I did this thing and it wasn't good for this reason, therefore I shouldn't do it anymore. And that's a much more constructive way to watch footage and improve from it, because you're not just putting yourself down and sending yourself down the rabbit hole of low self-esteem. You're saying, I'm human, I made a mistake, and in the future I will not make that mistake. Hopefully that answers your question, even though I feel like this is a very deep subject that could be covered in its own video. If you guys want that, I guess I could do it. Just let me know in the comments. Navaste asks, It's known that it is healthy to play more than one sport in real life for multiple reasons. Does this translate to esports? If so, what games do you recommend for developmental reasons? It's an interesting question, and in the psychology of learning and expertise, this is an idea known as transfer. And the whole concept around transfer is you do this one thing, and whatever skill and knowledge you gather from that one thing, it transfers, so to speak, to something else. The problem is that with transfer, it tends to be very limited. So you can pull maybe a couple of things here and there from one type of activity, and it will only, in very small surface ways, translate to other activities. For example, a lot of people talk about, let's say, chess as some kind of analogy for politics or warfare or something like that. The problem is that chess is not a very good model of those activities because chess is a well-defined sequential game, as they say in game theory. And real-life conflict is much more real-time. It involves tons of factors. And therefore, if your thinking is all around chess, yes, maybe there are some concepts that will help you here and there, but by and large, they're going to have to be so modified for the real world that they're going to lose all meaning, and therefore, they aren't that helpful. I tend to fall down that same attitude about transfer, so I don't think if you're trying to get good at Onward, for example, that playing another game will just automatically make you good at Onward. That being said, when we're talking about, let's say, physical sports, there are ways to create transfer. So I'm really into grappling, as I'm sure you know if you watch my videos, and you can lift weights. And lifting weights will make you stronger. Making stronger bodies will translate into better grappling because you can better control people. So there is some transfer there. With VR first-person shooters, I would say there's something similar in the sense that if you are playing other VR first-person shooters, there's a very good chance that just the muscle memory of raising your hands up to shoot can give you, good snapshot reflexes, and give you ideas about how to move around in an environment that maybe you wouldn't get from playing pancake shooters. The other side of that coin is that in many games, there's much more to the meta game that you can get out of playing other games. For example, there are some people who have played paintball or airsoft. In some examples, I know some people in the league that are like that who came into Onward who were really good because they had played in a team, because they had played something that involved shooting in real life, and they could very quickly become good at Onward. Likewise, if you were, say, a pro in CSGO, the game is very different in many respects, but it does inculcate that concept of teamwork and how to communicate and call-outs, things like that. So I wouldn't focus too much on playing other games to get better on Onward. I would say focus on getting better at the larger concepts. So I know a lot of people are playing Pop 1, for example. If you're playing that by yourself, I would argue that's not that useful for you. Maybe there's something to be gleaned out of that. I don't know. I haven't played it at this point. But really, you should be looking for activities that allow you to think in ways that are going to be helpful in a team environment. So playing airsoft, playing paintball, which I know would probably be hard in COVID right now, those sorts of things will help you. Whereas, I'm not going to recommend that you go play Go or chess or something like that if you want to get better at thinking strategically in this particular context. So what games do I recommend? I don't know. Personally, I would say just keep playing Onward. But if I absolutely had to tell you what to play, it would have to be other team-based first-person shooters, preferably in VR so you get some of the physicality down as well, but just something that will force you to think that way. Reinhardt Dean asks, has casting affected your gameplay in Onward? It's hard to answer that question. I'm not a big believer in my own ability to gauge something so disconnected, sort of related to the question of transfer earlier. I would like to think so, because I'm watching angles so much and I'm having to think about exactly what other people are doing all the time rather than just being in my own head, which is what you're doing when you're playing. So yeah, I like to think that helps. Also, just the fact that I am focusing on the map so much means I'm watching team movements a lot more carefully than is even possible when I'm in-game. And therefore, I like to think that's developed my overall tactical and strategic framework. But I have no idea. I feel like it's made me better, but I also play all the time. So whether it was casting or whether it's just playing a lot, or I'm not sure. So hopefully that's a satisfactory answer, but I don't really think there is an answer at the end of the day. Paulo asks, how do I get better with a gun stock faster? Brutal truth here is you just have to play with it. I haven't said anything on a video recently, but I did, in fact, receive my stock from James. The USPS finally brought it to me after something like a month and a half. I don't remember exactly how long. But anyway, I got my stock, and I've played in the last, I believe, 3 matches with it. And wow, has it made a difference. I love it. But when I first got it, it took me, I don't know, at least a week and a half, and that might even be conservative, of playing with it every single night to get the hang of it. It was more than worth it, in my opinion. I can now snapshot on people much faster. It's way easier for me to get a sight picture. Just in general, it's a better experience playing the game with a stock. But if your question is, how do you sort of cheat that process? It's not really there. I mean, it's not possible. You just have to play with it a lot. I have found that just making little adjustments here and there and really paying attention to how the stock has affected my shots and what I'm doing on a moment-to-moment basis helps. Just have a little more awareness of the fact that you're going to be slower. For example, I used to check my tablet almost compulsively. I mean, I would check it even when I knew I was the last one up. But with my stock, it's a little harder to do that right away. So I have to be more conscious of being in cover and thinking about using my stock. Same with my radio, really, because I can't just snap into my radio. I have to get cover, because if I get caught behind cover while I'm using the radio, it's going to be hard for me to adjust. And there's also situations where I have to take my controllers out of the stock, and that creates problems too. So you just have to be more conscious of that. And I realized that very quickly, so I thought to myself, all right, if I have to do this because of my stock, then I have to do that as well. I have to be more cautious, I have to be faster, whatever. So just think about it, and more than anything, just play with your stock a lot. It's really no shortcut there. You will adapt to it eventually if you play with it enough. Jordonio asks, what is your opinion on the new teams that have been formed recently? I feel like this question was asking for specific team opinions, and that's not something I would give out in public. I'm human. Obviously, I have my own opinions about the ones I know about, at least. But the reason I chose this question is because there's a certain dynamic that I think new players should be aware of. And in fact, as of today, we are starting to see this happen with some of the new teams, which is if you rise through bronze and silver really fast, there is for sure a hard ceiling that you're going to run into. Once you get to the gold and diamond level, you're dealing with teams that in many cases have years of experience, hundreds of hours more experience than you, in some cases at the extreme end, like let's say Globochem, thousands of hours over your experience in the game. Now, everybody loves the idea of the underdog. Everyone wants to believe that a team can come out of nowhere and replace the old guard, so to speak. And I'm not saying that that's impossible. Could happen, especially as the pool of players gets larger. We are going to tap into more talented players. I think we're starting to see a little bit of that already. But ultimately, this game rewards experience. It has a lot to do with map knowledge. It has a lot to do with mistakes and how to punish them. And this is something I've talked about in some of my other videos. But the big thing that you should keep in mind is that when you are playing against bronze and silver teams, you can get away with a ton of stupid moves. And they just won't punish you for it because they don't know how to, or they don't care to. Like, you can do some super reckless flank, you can set up a funky defensive position, and in general, you can just get real cute, as I would call it, with everything you do. And maybe that works at that level. But when you're dealing with the best teams, they just nullify all of that. They've seen it, they know how to cope with it. They're so adaptable, and they're so good at communication, and they're so good at figuring out where your weaknesses are, that unless you play a near perfect game, they'll just crush you. So you'll see teams come through the ranks. They'll start out at the very bottom. They are clearly superior to everybody in bronze. They just slice through them like a hot knife through butter. And then they reach that level and they get blown out. I don't mean just lose. I mean like get a 13-0 kind of loss. And sometimes it makes a team fall apart. It's happened before, and this kind of dynamic happens, in my experience at least, every season. Every season, some team does this. They rise like a phoenix from the ashes, and all of a sudden everyone thinks they're going to be the ones to show up and dethrone the top 5 or something. And they hit about number 15, number 10, maybe even they reach the middle of the top 10, who knows? And then they just get destroyed. Morale goes out the window. They question the point of existence. They go down this path of nihilism. And they either just drop hard down the rankings, or they quit, or both. So I would tell you, if you're a new player and you're rising up the ranks fast, first of all, congratulations. You should be happy about that. Second of all, be ready for a challenge. Once you reach that level, there are no easy games. Truly, every time Mayhem goes into a game, we are ready for a fight. We don't expect anybody in our area of the rankings to be a pushover, ever. It just does not happen. When you're dealing with the top of the ladder, you're dealing with people who know how to play, period. And it comes down to execution, like who's going to make more mistakes than the other. That's really the big one. Who's going to make the better plays, and it's rarely going to come down to, oh, well, this team had some weird angle nobody had thought about, or this team did some flank that nobody saw coming. That's just not usually what it is. It's just some marginal difference in terms of execution that tilts the game in one team's favor. And sometimes it's psychological. Maybe a team gets capped on the first round or something, and they just start falling apart mentally, even though they have the skills to win the game. That's what you start running into when you're at the higher ranks. So if you're on one of those teams, be ready for that. And more importantly, don't just quit when the day comes that you get smashed, because it's going to happen. It happens to everybody. Just keep your head up, honestly reevaluate what's going on, and then say, okay, this happened. I'm going to use some non-judgmental awareness. We're going to come back and be stronger. If you can do that, you'll be a great team. If you can't, you'll fall apart. That's at least what I've seen. So try your best to just be honest with yourself and say, okay, maybe we did really well at the lower ranks with a certain play style because we were playing against lower end opponents. And now we've got to change things. And be ready, because changing a habit is much harder than forming it. So if you got to a certain point doing a bunch of things, it's going to be hard to re-engineer your whole team to play a different way. And that is the uphill battle that most people don't want to wage. They just want to believe that they can keep doing what they've been doing historically, and that's going to make the difference. But if you're smart about it, you'll realize it's not the case, and it is going to be a matter of making changes, dramatic changes in some cases. Do that, and you'll succeed. So, long-winded answer, but that is my opinion about new teams. Overall, if you're asking me about what do I think about having all these new teams, I think it's a positive. I love to see the league getting so big. Last time I looked, we had something like 70 almost active teams. That's amazing. So let's keep growing the league. But just bear in mind that dynamic I was talking about, and the game will be a lot more enjoyable no matter what happens. Hecklack asks, it's your birthday and DPI lets you remove just one thing from the current version of Onward permanently. It could be an entire map, an OBJ, a spawn location, a map feature, a weapon, a game mechanic, even an Onward player, anything at all. What would it be for you? This one I've had to think about quite a bit, I'm still not sure if this is my final answer, because there's a lot of things I would like to remove or change in the game. And no, I'm not going to take the cop-out route of saying bugs, because those are getting worked on and are likely to get removed anyway. One thing I would like to see is most of the weapons in this game removed. Anybody who plays this enough knows that there are only one, at most two viable options per class. That's because picking a gun in this game is simple math, truly. It's just, okay, how many points does it cost me in my loadout? How accurate is it? How much damage does it do? And if I were to be in a face-to-face exchange with an enemy, who is more likely to win, assuming that we shoot roughly the same time, or something along those lines. And that's why you don't see a lot of variety in weapon choices amongst the top players, because it doesn't really matter once you figure out the math. There are just objectively better weapons to use. And even more importantly, I hate the focus that especially new players have on weapons, because weapons aren't the most important part of this game at all. What matters is your tactical and strategic sense, teamwork, communication, understanding angles, things like that. That's what matters. So when people get fixated on guns, they're getting fixated on something that is in many ways irrelevant. Guns are a solved problem in this game. And I would argue this is true in many games, not just Onward. The analogy I always like to use is fighting games, where fighting games tend to have a lot of characters, but there's only a few that really make sense in competition. If you watch Street Fighter or Tekken or any of these other big fighting franchises, yes, you occasionally see somebody who shows up with an unorthodox fighter or whatever, but more often than not, you're just going to have a small group of fighters within that selection that are viable choices in a competitive setting. And it's because of the way that they're designed, the way the game plays, so on and so forth. That's exactly the same thing with weapons in Onward. All these other weapons are there more or less to placate the curiosity of newer players. And there's this sort of process that you see with new players where they go through stages of different guns. You can even see it happen just in one play session. They'll go from shotguns to RPGs to SMGs, whatever. And then finally they figure out after playing enough that those weapons are useless, or not necessarily useless, but subpar compared to other weapons, and they just stop using them. Maybe in co-op people use them more often, I don't know. Maybe that's DPI's logic there. What I'd love to see is just like one or two weapons per class, the only ones that are actually good, so that people would just stop talking about weapons. Also, just a side note, you go into suggestions in the Onward Discord, and something like 80% of all the suggestions are all the stupid guns that people want. Which again, let's just stop this conversation right now and say, no, each class is going to have at most two viable weapons. Stop worrying about the weapons and learn how to play the actual game itself. So I will step off my soapbox now, but as of right now, that's the thing I would like to remove from Onward, if DPI just gave me godlike powers to do that. Empty Full asks, what are some of the best new strategies/plays you've seen since the recent ban of smokes and C4? If you're watching this in the future and smokes and C4 are both enabled again, just know that after the release of 1.8, which is what brought Onward to the Quest, smokes had to be modified to accommodate the Quest's hardware, and as a result, the smokes could blind you, and people were exploiting the hell out of that. They were smoking through walls and creating a situation where people were, in some sense, being flashbanged for a long period of time. You could be, for example, on one of the porches on Suburbia, somebody could send a smoke through a house. It'll go all the way through that, and whoever's on the porch is just blind. And people were moving in and taking advantage of that. And C4s were banned because the only way you can get rid of a C4 now is by throwing frags at it. It used to be that you could walk up to it and knife it, or you could shoot it from a distance if you spotted it. That does not work anymore, unless it's your C4. If you were the one who threw it, you can do those things, but for some reason, the enemy can't. So for the time being, they're banned. Hopefully, in the future, they will come back. But anyway, it's completely changed the playstyle for a lot of teams because they don't have cover from smokes. And if we're just being real, a lot of teams were using smokes to blind people through walls, and they don't have that tool anymore. Smokes also allow for audio cover in many situations. So playing a map like Downfall is really tough without smokes. I will say it's been pretty cool to watch the way people have adapted, though. There's a lot more cover fire going on, especially from my fellow LMG users on big maps. You have to put lots of rounds downrange to make sure people keep their heads down. Since you do not have smoke, defenses are getting smarter. In general, it's just changing the game. And it's also changed the way that flashes get used. So one example I can think of off the top of my head is there are teams now... ALG actually did this against us really well when we played them, Aimless Gaming, for those of you who don't know ALG. And when we were on the, as they call it, the Diamond of Death objective on Cargo, they just dumped nothing but flashes into the center where all of us were clustered and just wiped us out. It's really bad. Now, we won that match and everything, but that was a wake-up call. Like, okay, on defense, you have to be a lot more careful about where you're positioning yourself, especially on closed maps like that, because if you're exposed to the sky or some easy angle to throw a flashbang in, and you're playing against a team that understands this new meta, you're going to have problems. In terms of other exact plays or strategies, I don't know, but just in general, I would say the trend is towards just being smarter on offense with cover fire. That's happening a lot. People are using machine guns to cover up foot sounds. They're using machine guns to keep people's heads down as they're really supposed to. And I think smokes made them maybe a little lazy about that. People were not using LMGs the way they were supposed to be used in many cases because they could just toss a smoke. And when it comes to C4, that's changed a lot because especially on a map like Subway and C4 or Cargo, for example, there are situations where you can kind of shut down an entire route with C4. And you can't do that anymore. So defenses have to be much smarter about watching those angles, rotating as needed, and just being better. So for me, it's a positive. I personally don't use C4. I never play Specialist. And I did use smokes, but I like to think Mayhem has adapted pretty well to that. And it's also made for some much more exciting matches because people are just dumping flashes and rushing in a lot more. Navaste asks, how do you convert seconds to monocaps? This is a question that scientists have been asking for decades. I've run many experiments, created machines like the Large Hadron Collider to try to figure out the true underlying fundamental idea behind the monocap, but we just had no way of understanding it until we played Dark Matter, where we got to see a monocap in all its glory to top off a map at 5-0. So rather than just talk about what a monocap is, let's roll some film.
Nope, just kidding. Comes back out, goes for the cap. Defenders are too far away to do anything. Mono might actually cap here.
Can Mono read?
We'll find out in just a second if Mono can count or read.
He's got 15 seconds.
He's got so much time. Fino's coming in.
He didn't hear. Oh, wow. I was like, did he not hear those footsteps?
Oh, man. Just like that, Mayhem went 5-0 on map 3. They already won the series, but they took map 3 commandingly, so...
Well, based on that footage, I think we can conclude that a monocap is roughly 17 seconds. All joking aside, congrats to Mono. It's a fantastic cap. With a 1v3 situation initially, then he took out somebody on the objective, so 1v2, and he's, even with his monocapping speed, he managed to get it before getting shot. So, good work, dude. Alright. Well, it's about half an hour in. I figure you guys probably have had enough, so I'm going to wrap this up now. All I want to say at the end is, once again, if you would like to have your questions answered, just go to my Discord, which you can join by going to invite.gg/ThetaVR, and we have a Q&A channel within that Discord where you can ask your questions. I don't have a regular schedule for Q&As anymore. I was trying to do it every Friday, but that just got a little too hectic for me. But I do still put them out periodically, and I will do my best to get to your question if possible, although I guarantee nothing. So anyway, that's all I've got for today, and until next time, this is Theta, signing off.